Hi, my name is Raphael Wong, and I'm partner at Hilger & Yip. Today, I'm doing a series of interviews on adoption, titling Different Color, Same Love, and I'm joined by Josh. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you.
Josh, now I understood that you recently did an adoption application in the US, jointly made with your long-term partner, Taka.
Yes.
And your son's name, Isaac.
That's correct.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the process?
Yeah. Let me go back a little bit. So I've been in Hong Kong for over 22 years. I moved here in January 2003 to work for a nonprofit. And since then, I've worked in numerous international schools. I'm currently the principal of international school. And in August, I'll be moving to a senior position at the English Schools Foundation. Taka and I met here in Hong Kong in, I think it was December 2010. And then we went out for the first time in January 2011. And I always knew that I wanted to have kids. That was like a non-negotiable for me. It was really important. But I didn't quite know how that was going to happen. As a gay man, you have to look for the way, right? It's not laid out in front of you. So you have to figure out what way is going to work best for you. And I mentioned it to Taka that I wanted to have a family, not on the first date, because that might have scared him away. But we ultimately started to have conversations together, and we started to look at surrogacy, which is not legal in Hong Kong, but we started to see if there were possible ways that we could do it. We looked at adoption here, which also was challenging because there seemed to be barriers at every turn. There wasn't a way for us to adopt in Hong Kong and be authentic and true to ourselves. So we couldn't adopt as a couple. We're not married. We don't have a civil partnership. But we've been together now for, I can't do the math, but over 14 years. So we started to look at that route. And it looked like, well, one of us could apply as a single male in Hong Kong to adopt, but we would have to lie about our relationship and establish almost a false home setting. And we felt like if we wanted to build our family, which, represents togetherness and belonging, that to do that on a lie, we couldn't do that. So I did a lot of research online, and I found an obscure reference to the possibility of adopting in the US while living abroad. And it's not a completely foreign concept if you're in the military or if you're a missionary, but perhaps for a private citizen, it's not something that's very public. So I found an organization called Adoption Professionals Abroad, and I reached out to one of their social workers, and that kind of started our journey from there.
Oh, do you still remember when you make the application and how you even start to introduce this idea with Taka?
Yeah, well, we'd been in conversation about how are we going to do this probably for a year or two. And so I'm going to think it was probably around 2014 is when I found the Adoption Professionals Abroad. And I said, I think I might have found a way as a US citizen that we can adopt. And the first thing I needed to do was contact them. So I reached out. One of their social workers was based in Malaysia, American qualified, US citizen, but happened to be living here in Asia. And I thought, well, that's great because she's close. And maybe she can help us. And so I sent her an email and I said, this is us. This is the journey we've been on so far. Can you help direct us? Is there anything that we can do? And she wrote back and she said, perfect, we can help. And she explained the process. So one of the first things that you have to do with any adoption, as far as I'm aware, and I am going to use the word any, is you have to do a home study. Which means that someone qualified, usually a social worker, it could be a doctor, someone who has some sort of qualification that makes them viable to do the home study, right? So they have to come into your home. They don't only have to check the physical premises to make sure that it's safe, but they also have to interview the intended parents. So I'll use the words intended parents, and I'll use the words birth parents as well. So those are two separate sets of people, but it's the language that's used in adoption. So we were the intended parents, and she had to interview us separately. And it has to happen in person. So we flew, her name is Larry. We flew her over from KL. She arrived early in the morning. We picked her up at the airport. I had my car at that time and drove out to pick her up. Met her at arrivals. We got in the car and the conversation started from there. I'd made a lovely lunch. She had to meet with us separately. So one of us would go into the bedroom and one would stay with Larry. Once again, Larry is checking to make sure that everything aligns. The things that we say are aligned. She's not trying to call you out or anything, but she needs to make sure that people aren't doing this for the wrong reasons, or they're not trying to get a child for the wrong purposes or whatever. So she was really lovely, really lovely. And then she does an interview with us together. And we chat, and she was so positive. And she said, "You guys are perfect." And her fatal flaw was, you'll be matched instantly. Like, it will just happen. Which gave us false hope, which we dealt with when we had to. So this was 2014. A couple things were going on. So she approved us. She did the home study. But we also mentioned to her that we were going on a trip to Hanoi. And she goes, "Oh, I have a couple there who you should meet, who I've worked with, who can tell you about their journey." And it turns out that it was the US ambassador to Vietnam. He was living there with his partner. And so she asked them if they could give us the email. And so one morning while we were in Hanoi, we went to the official residence and had to sign the guest book, and we chatted with them. They had 2 children that they had been placed with, or matched with, I should say, not placed, matched. And their 2 children were actually biological siblings, which was really cool. And they told us our story, and it made us feel better about this whole process. So once the home study is completed, you then have to decide, how are you going to find a birth parent who might choose you? And this process is private. Obviously, there's adoption in the US that is, I don't know what the term is, I'll use public, I guess. So many kids are put into foster care. And then are put into foster homes, and then are either adopted out of foster care or from institutions, right? So for us, as citizens living in Hong Kong, we knew that we needed to go a private adoption. We couldn't go from foster to adopt. That wasn't going to be possible in the US. I think it's important to note that the adoption for us in the US is considered a domestic adoption. It is not an international adoption. With an international adoption, obviously the Hague Convention comes into play. But for us, because the adoption is being done domestically, under the state that you're in, we didn't have to worry about the legality that sits there. I will, as we get further into the story, I guess, I'll tell you more about what that meant for Hong Kong and what other things we needed to be done. So we had to find a birth parent who wanted us, right? So that's where we're at.
So how long did you wait?
Yeah, it took a while. The first thing we had to do, we had to put together our adoption profile. And so imagine like matchmaking, but like 2.0. Like we had to have photos done. So I searched in Hong Kong for a photographer who was, well, it turns out that she was a lesbian, so that was helpful. Like, she knew what we were going for, and she had kids of her own, and so that was helpful. So we took some pictures in Hong Kong Park, and we had to gather pictures from our lives together. And you're pretty much writing a letter to the birth mother, any potential birth parent, and then you tell them about yourselves. This adoption profile is very personal, and it's definitely a work of love because you're putting your heart and soul out there, and you're saying, this is who we are, and we want to have a family. Sorry, I didn't think I'd get emotional. And I love our adoption profile. The only thing is it has to be updated annually as you go through this process. So we created the profile and we talked to Larry about the best way for us to find a birth parent. We met with a lawyer in New York who specializes in private adoption, and they suggested, you can put ads out and you kind of have to pimp yourself out to try and find.
What are the usual selling points?
So you know what? It's dependent on the birth parent. Every birth parent is looking for something different. So there is no magic formula around what that looks like. It's just, you have to hope that you get the right match and that someone chooses you. So we ended up going the route through what's called an adoption facilitator. And adoption facilitators are illegal in some US states and legal in others. And the adoption facilitator is essentially almost like a clearinghouse. They don't do the matching, but what happens is when agencies have cases that come up that they're not able to match, or they don't have a parent, they can't find a match for, they might say, I have this case. Can you share it with your list of clients to see if anyone wants to be presented? And so the terminology here being presented is then the adoption facilitator will send an email with the basic information around the birth parent or parents, the case, the estimated due date, any medical history that's pertinent, like reasons for the choosing to adopt. And then you have to decide if you want to put yourself forward. So we would start to get these cases, and we had criteria that we had discussed and talked about kind of what we were comfortable with, what we weren't comfortable with. We had decided we were only looking for newborns for a number of reasons. We were living abroad, so a change for a child older. My background is in education, and so child development, child psychology, all of those things kind of fit within my realm of understanding. And I know how traumatic things can be. And part of our process too, we had to do adoption courses on parenting or biracial families or mixed race families or all kinds of things. So all of these things are in our head, and we were like, no, I think a newborn will be easier. Also, because we're two dads. Yeah. And despite the fact that we hope everyone is open, taking a 3 or a 5-year-old from an environment where perhaps they were in a foster situation or all they have seen is a heteronormative kind of reality, then to land with two dads, where do you go with that? There's a lot to do. So we thought newborn is the way we wanted to go. Mm-hmm. So cases would start to come up and we would say, yes, we want to be presented. And so what's involved with that is we email the facilitator. We say, yes, we want to be presented. We would have to Venmo a fee to be presented. I think the fee was about $50. And we have but Venmo doesn't work in Hong Kong. So we had to get a friend in the US, and she would be kind of our conduit to getting the payment done. And then our profile book would be presented, and then we would hear whether or not we were selected or not. We weren't selected often. Okay. And I think
would they
that's
give you
generally,
reason?
nope, you don't get a reason.
Okay.
So for the first year, we would put ourselves forward and we didn't get anywhere. And it's discouraging because when you hit that year again, you need your home study again. It needs to be updated. You need to update your profile book. For us, part of the home study is your criminal conviction record check. And unfortunately, it's not easy to do in Hong Kong. And so as a US citizen, I could go to the consulate and I could get mine done and explain what was happening. The Japanese consulate refused to issue the letter that you need to take the police to get that clearance. So then I would take Taka to the consulate with me, And the first year it was trying, and we explained, and we had letters of verification to say we are adopting in the US and we need this clearance, and they would issue the letter. The next year, the same blockade would come up and I'd have to go through the process again. And then finally we reached a point where they would do it until most recently, where they said, no, we don't do that. And I said, but you have done that before. Why? What's the change in policy? Please explain. There's been no change in policy. Anyhow, it was very frustrating and stressful. So I'll go back now. So we were putting ourselves forward for cases, and the odd thing was cases would tend to come up the moment I was ready to fly out of Hong Kong for work, or Taka was ready to fly out. And so we'd be left in this like limbo about, oh, okay, so now you're gonna be there and I'm gonna be there, and what's gonna happen? So we were flying down to Australia for my best friend's wedding, and a case came up, and I was leaving a few days early. And I said, I think we should go for it. And he said, yes, I think we should go for it. And so we put ourselves out there and we waited. And I landed in Australia, and I think that night I got communication from the facilitator that we had been matched, that the birth mother wanted to speak with us. And this was for a child that was due in May, I think. So this was December. And we had that initial conversation. Taka had landed in the US. I actually think we left my best friend's reception not too early, but a little bit early so we could do this phone call. And we had a conversation, and she decided that she was ready to go forward with us. And she happened to be located in the state of Illinois, which is a bonus because I come from outside Chicago. So that was helpful in my mind. I was like, great. Because when we initially are deciding whether you're going to be put forward or not, you don't know what state.
I see.
So this is happening. And it turns out that the situation she's in, she's working with an adoption agency in Chicago. Great. That's easy for us. And it was the adoption, I can remember, the Adoption Center of Illinois. And I was then flying to the US. So we started conversations with them. We signed the paperwork, which meant that we were signing with the agency. So the agency would help facilitate the adoption when it was time. This was January 2018. About a week or two before February, I get a phone call as I'm getting ready to go to work, and it's the agency. It was either the agency or the facilitator telling us that they'd lost track of the birth mother. She'd just cut communication, and that they were very sorry, and they knew that we would need to take some time to process what had happened. But if we wanted to join their traditional adoption program, we could do that. And we would just transfer it because we'd already paid some initial fees. And so this was it's not 2018, I'm sorry. It would have been 2017. Because it already been 3 years since we met with Larry the first time, we'd gone through 3 home studies. And you reach a point in the process where you get so frustrated and you think nothing's going to happen. And I had been changing plans or not making plans because I kept on thinking, this is going to happen. And we'd already had one case before this in which we were matched, and we found out it was a case of fraud. So that happened the summer of 2016. So we'd been through this, and it really kind of starts to bear down on you. And so we both decided that we would sign with the traditional program, which pretty much meant that if anyone came to the agency and wanted to be presented or wanted to find a match, our profile book would be with them, and they could present our profile book to any family that they felt might be suitable for us. And then they could choose us if they wanted to. So that was February 2017. And we just went on and led our lives. So we planned trips, and we did our big summer holiday, and the school year began. It was August, and then it was September. And I woke up one early September, it was early September, might have been around the 6th or 7th of September, and I had an email from the agency. And it was really the first time we'd heard from the agency in quite some time. And they said there was a birth mother who had seen our profile and she wanted to meet with us. She hadn't selected us, and there was another family she was going to meet with as well, but she wanted to meet with us, and could we arrange that in the next day or so? And so we found the time and arranged it. And it's a really odd kind of setting, right? Because we're in Hong Kong, she's in Chicago. We're on, I think, Skype. It was Skype then. So Skype's no longer, but there we were on Skype. And she is with like an adoption counselor. She has someone with her, and then it's the two of us. And usually in these settings, Taka is a very outgoing, sociable person. But in these kind of settings, he's sometimes a bit quiet. So I normally kind of lead things for a while until we get going and find our flow. But we found out very quickly that Karen, her name's Karen, was a big Britney Spears fan. And Taka is a big Britney Spears fan. That Karen loved Halloween and Taka loves Halloween. And so before I knew it, they were just chit-chatting away. And I'm asking questions about, because we found out that Karen was about 4 weeks from delivering. So, which was also kind of big. So we had this conversation probably for about an hour on Skype, and then that's it. And then you wait. And we waited to see if she would choose us.
And when did she reply?
We must have found out, it wasn't that long. It was only probably a couple days. It was less than a week for sure. She also told us, and she has since told us, that when she was looking at our profile book, the baby kicked and was moving a lot. And she took that as a sign that we were meant to be Isaac's parents. So we...
But at that moment, can she still change her mind?
So yes. What happens with... And I believe so adoption laws are specific to states. So there's no universal law in the US around how adoption works. Each state governs themselves with this. And so as far as I know, there is no state where you can sign away parental rights before the baby is born. So the state of Illinois requires a 72-hour clearance before the birth mother can sign. Now, she can take 6 months or never to sign off, but 72 hours is the minimum. And so it all happened that the baby was due during the midterm break for my school here in Hong Kong. And because this process, I think for a heterosexual couple having a baby, they start celebrating and telling people usually from 3 months after the first trimester, because in general, health-wise, that's a safe time to start to share. With adoption, because you don't know what's going to happen, you kind of have to keep things very private. And so the support that you might have had, you don't have from everyone perhaps in your circle. And so we had a few close friends in our circle who knew what was happening. I had to, of course, let my work know. So I talked to the principal, I talked to the other vice principal, and maybe a close friend at school.
And were they all supportive?
Oh, they were all supportive, hands down, all supportive. But I couldn't announce to the staff that I might be gone beyond the 1 week. Like I might be gone for the next 3 months. So I got approval to go, no problem whatsoever. I left for October break. And I think the due date was around the 2nd of October, 2nd or 3rd of October. And Taka happened to have a flight to Chicago. He's a senior, well, now he's an ISM with Cathay, but he was, and he still is, cabin crew, but he had a flight. So he was going to be in Chicago from about the 3rd until the 6th. So there was no baby, nothing on the 3rd, no baby on the 4th, no baby on the 5th. So I said, well, I'll go stay at the crew hotel with Taka.
Yeah.
And I took my mom's mobile phone with me because that was the number that we had given the agency. And so I remember vividly, we'd gone to the movies and we went to see separate films because Taka always sees movies when he's outport, and I hadn't seen this particular movie and I wanted to see it and he wanted to see something else. So we went to the movies together but saw different films. And then we went back to the hotel and went to sleep. And at about 5:30 in the morning, my mom's phone rings. And I pick it up, and it's the adoption counselor who's with Karen, and she says, Karen's gone into labor. She's at the hospital. She's decided she'd like you to be here. Can you get here? And I can hear her in the background, and she's like, yes, I want you to, I don't remember her exact words. And I hung up the phone, and I said to Taka, we need to go. She's in labor. And Taka hates when I tell this story, but I said, Taka, she's in labor. And he goes, but I have to go to work. I said, yeah, your flight isn't until 4:00 this afternoon. It's 5:30 in the morning. How am I going to get to the airport? I said, helicopter? I don't know. We will get you to the airport, but we have to go now. Well, but I have to go to work. Yeah, you've said that. I hear you, but if you don't come with me, you are going to regret this for the rest of your life. You need to go. He goes, I'm going to go get ready and I'll figure out a plan. So he went to shower. I start packing things up. He comes out. He's like, right, I've got a plan. I'll say that you've had a family emergency and that I will meet the crew at the airport. Because typically when flight crews are outport, they travel to the airport together. Like that's what they kind of have to do. But he thought, okay, we can do this. He's like, I just hope we don't run into any of the crew as we're leaving. And of course, there's a crew member standing out front smoking as we left the hotel, but that was besides the point. So already, then at 5:57, we hear that the baby's been born. We don't know if it's a boy or a girl. We didn't ask. She didn't tell us. She didn't know either.
Was it on purpose?
Yeah, she didn't want to know. That was her choice. At that point, she didn't want to know. She wanted to wait till the baby was born. It's not like she didn't ever want to know. She just didn't want to know. And so we drove to the hospital and we arrive on the maternity delivery labor ward and we get let in and we're trying to figure out where to go. And this nurse comes up and she goes, are you the poppies? I'm like, poppies? I'm like, poppy is like Spanish slang for like daddies, right? And so I was like, the poppies? I said, yes. Because Karen is originally from Mexico and she speaks English and the whole family does. Well, we later found out. We only knew Karen at this point. But so like, yeah, we're the poppies. And oh, I know where you need to go. And she brought us into the room and Karen was there and the baby happened to be off on the side, I think in a bassinet. And she goes, do you want to know, and this is the first time we're meeting Karen, and she goes, do you want to know, what it is? And I'm like, yes. And she's like, it's a boy. And they put him in my arms. And of course I start crying again. I'm the crier. Taka did cry too. It wasn't just me alone this time. And we proceeded to spend the morning and the afternoon with Karen. My dad ended up coming to the hospital, not to see us, but to take Taka to the airport because he wasn't working far from there. And so that was sorted. And then, so now the 72 hours have begun, yes. Right? So, sorry, I kind of digress, but it's a really personal story, obviously.
I can definitely see the joy.
Yeah, yeah. And so Taka is now flying back to Hong Kong, but he's also has a week off the following week. So he's due to be back in Chicago on the Sunday. So it's Friday. So Saturday, I get up to go to the hospital and it's obviously not 72 hours yet, but I woke up with a migraine because all of this was really intense. But I made it into the city and I brought bagels and cream cheese and like food for Karen. And I sat there with her and the baby and we talked and talked and talked. And then Sunday morning, I got a phone call from, and we're still not at 72 hours because that will be Monday morning. But Sunday morning, I got the phone call that said, from the agency that said, Karen and the baby have been cleared. So you can come to the hospital to take the baby. He wasn't Isaac yet. So what happens in Illinois when an adoption occurs, there are three things that can happen with the baby prior to the birth parent relinquishing parental rights. The baby can stay, and the choice here is up to the birth parent. So the birth parent can decide to keep the baby until they've made that decision. They can put the baby into emergency care with the agency. They have fosters who are ready to go, or they can place the baby with the intended parents. Now, Karen had already decided. So the phone call I was getting was to say, make sure you install the car seat and come to the hospital. And Taka's not there. And I'm in Chicago with my parents. And my parents had been a bit skeptical about the adoption process from the beginning. And not because they were against adoption, but it's a foreign concept. I came out to them years ago, but it was still kind of like, and now there's a baby. And there are no other grandchildren. Like, he is the one grandchild. So I was like, I am really winning at this. Like, this is a good thing. Like, work with me here. But they had also seen us with the case of fraud that had happened earlier. And so they were never really sure. And I think they were just trying to protect me, which I see in retrospect. But I remember waking them up and saying, I'm going to the hospital. And so I drove to the hospital by myself. And this was I will never forget that particular day, because I was there and they were doing something with Isaac. I can't remember what. And then the birth counselor said to me, now is when we're going to put you in a different room and we're going to let Karen spend some time with the baby before she hands him over to you. So I'm put into one of these waiting rooms, and it's in the labor and delivery. So it's not a depressing waiting room. It's not like a sympathy room or anything, but
were there other people?
No, it was just me. And I start sobbing. And all I can think of in my head is, I'm taking this woman's baby. I'm taking this woman's baby. And it's a really hard thing to kind of go through. And so I managed to dial my parents, and my mom picks up, and I can't get words out. All she can hear is me sobbing. And all she says is, oh my God, she's changed her mind. She's changed her mind. And I'm like, no, she hasn't changed her mind, but I'm taking someone's baby and I'm here by myself. And my mom goes, I knew I should have come with you. I should have come with you. I should have offered to come with you. And I said, yeah, someone should have been here with me. And then we got through that conversation, and then the agency called, the director of the agency, who I'd spoken to previously on the phone, but we hadn't met before. And she goes, look, what you are about to experience and what you are experiencing, very few people experience. Like, in the grand scheme of things, like, you can go up to someone and say, do you remember what you did for your 40th birthday? And they'll tell you about your 40th birthday. You know, it's a dinner party conversation or a cocktail party, whatever. But you don't go up to someone and say, do you remember when you took that woman's baby? And she said it in such a way that it was like, okay, right. Yeah, I get this. She's like, look, it is hard, but remember, she's making this choice and this is where you're at. And it was about an hour and a half probably that I was on my own in that room. And then they came to get me. And by this point, Karen was in a wheelchair to leave the hospital because that's the law. And she had dressed the baby in an outfit that she wanted him to leave the hospital in. Now, it's October in Chicago. It's not incredibly cold yet, but the outfit that he was in layers. And I looked down at this baby and I'm thinking, this baby is overheating. So I've got in the back of my head, I'm like, we have to get these clothes off this child. Like, this is not good. ASAP. And I'm like, but we've got to get Karen out of here safely as well. And she holds Isaac and she says some things to him in Spanish and hands him to me. And we're both crying and she's wheeled out. And the birth mother counselor says, I will be back.
Were you allowed to take photos at that time?
With Karen? It was definitely not the appropriate time to take photos. So I'm standing there with the baby. I'm crying. This wonderful nurse comes in and she goes, right, do you have the footprints? I said, oh no, we gave everything to Karen. Well, then we need to make more. And she re-inked his feet and made the little baby footprints. She said, here's a bag from the hospital with, formula and diapers and all this stuff. And I said, look, my partner has just landed and he's going to be here. Can we please wait until he gets here before I go? And she's like, you can stay in this room as long as you need to. And so my parents had gone to pick up Taka from the airport and they dropped him at the hospital. And we got the baby ready to go and we put him in the car and we're both like, you're a parent and you're kind of like, what do we do now? Like, what happens? And one of the things the agency said is, look, you don't want to tell anyone until things are official because you might not end up with the baby.
Well, at that time, still not official.
Still not official. So he's gone into care with us. And 72 hours would be the next morning, Monday morning.
Right.
But we're at the hospital. My parents are with my grandmother, who at that point was 93, 92. And they were at her house, or at her condo. And I called mom and I said, well, we're in the car. We have the baby. She's like, well, we're at grandma's. I said, well, what should we do? And she's like, come here. And I said, but they told us not to. Like, what if things don't work out? And she's like, well, we'll just explain to grandma. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I said, I think I need to talk to grandma before we show up with a baby. Yeah. So I got grandma on the phone and I said, grandma, I need to tell you something. So Taka's here. Oh, good. I'd like to see Taka. Da, 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 da. I said, and we have a baby. Like now? And I'm like, yeah, we have the baby now. Well, why aren't you here? Bring him here. And so we bring him home to my grandma's house and we introduce him and say his full name. And my mom goes, oh, well, I like the middle name. And my grandma goes, I don't like the name. And I'm like, well, that's a great start. And we get home and grandma called later to apologize about the name. So then it's Monday. Sorry, I feel like you need to know the bits of the story though, like it's all connected. I know this is about kind of the process, but this is the process. Like there's such uncertainty attached to adoption that you don't know what's going to happen. So Monday happens and Taka and my parents are like on edge and you can kind of sense it. And I'm trying to remain kind of calm and neutral. And around 5:30, I get a phone call in the afternoon. And it's the agency. And they've called to say that she needs a bit more time, that she has not signed. And so I hang up the phone and they're all like, what did they say? And well, she needs more time. As you will also know as a parent, and having seen your wife after delivering, there are a lot of hormones that are released in that process. And there's a lot of emotion. And obviously for Karen, dually, triple, quadruply so, because she is making a very important decision about what she's going to do. So they were like, but it's been 72 hours. I said, no one listened. Like I explained this to you. 72 hours was the earliest that she could sign. She gets to take as long as she wants. She's the birth parent. Like she gets the time. So we made it through Tuesday and now it's Wednesday morning. And we have to take Isaac for his new baby check. It's like the 5-day check or whatever. So we'd made that appointment through a doctor's office was recommended by the agency. So it wasn't so close to where we live, but it was close enough. And I hopped in the shower to get ready. I'd put Isaac in his crib. And I got out of the shower and Taka is not with Isaac. And normally Taka would have been right there because he was doting and whatnot. And I only had a towel wrapped. I still remember this. I had a towel wrapped around me and I went downstairs and Taka's on the phone. I'm like, why is Taka on the phone? And my mom comes from the kitchen and Taka says, thank you very much. I'll have him call you. And he hangs up the phone and he looks at me and he goes, you should have been the one to get that phone call. And he said, she signed the papers. Mm. And I remember looking at my mom and going, I'm a dad. And I called the agency back and they said, you can come in at any time. It doesn't have to be today. And I said, well, we're going to do the well baby check. And they said, well, then come in afterwards. And I said, well, can my mom come? And then she said, of course, you can bring your mom. So we went to do the well baby check. We went to the agency. We signed our papers, which by law then, he is now ours. However, we still have to go through the courts. So there's still legal proceedings that need to happen. And so essentially from there, what happens is we had an attorney, an adoption attorney in Illinois working with us. And once again, we're not married, but in the state of Illinois, you just need one parent, but we were able to put two parents down. So we had the adoption decree. Taka wasn't in Chicago when I had to go to court the first time.
Right.
So I went to court the first time. My parents came with, and the judge who was actually supposed to work with us was there was some judge's important meeting or something happening. So they had this substitute judge in place. She was legal and all. But she'd been like retired. I think they pulled her out of retirement. Okay. And she was just in adoption court for the day or whatever. And she was lovely. And we explained where Taka was. And we knew that when Taka was next in town, he'd have to come to court so that the judge could meet him. And it ended up being a different judge this time, but that's what needed to happen. And so in Illinois, in order for an adoption to be finalized, it requires a minimum of 6 months. So during that time, we needed to send updates to the agency in order for that to happen. But I'm going to go back a step because once Taka came back into Chicago around first week of November, so Isaac was born October 6th. I was probably in court 2 weeks after that. Okay. And then Taka was back first week of November. We had to go to court, but we also had to file for Isaac's passport so that we could get back to Hong Kong. Doctor had already told us that he could do all the necessary vaccinations by 6 weeks, and therefore we could travel after 6 weeks, and that would be fine. So we went to the U.S. passport office downtown Chicago, which I don't recommend to anybody. And I had all this paperwork. I had the adoption decree. I had the change of name, everything in order.
Hang on, so you obtained the decree shortly after the birth, or you have to wait for 6 months, you said?
So nothing's finalized. So I don't know if it's a petition for the adoption or whatever it's called, but we had legal paperwork that stated that Isaac was ours. And we even had new birth certificates by that time. And then it's finalized 6 months later. Yes. And so I brought this all up. We get called up to the counter and I explained to the person behind the counter and they go, I don't think we do this. I said, well, I'm pretty sure you do because here's all the legal paperwork. Here are your forms. You just need to process them because we need this passport. And he said, well, we can try. I'm like, well, I hope so. Because it's very difficult to take a newborn photograph for a passport. I don't know if I'd been hours trying to get the perfect photo. So I was like, this has to work. Like, I got the photo. And so submitted it and we had it expedited. So it should have been ready in about a week or so. And sure enough, the passport arrives. And luckily, all of the legal paperwork, because I had to submit all the original documentation, also came back to us. So then we were set. Karen reached out, or actually the agency reached out, and Karen wanted to see us before we left. So we had brunch with her, and Isaac, of course. And that was lovely. And then we headed back to Hong Kong. Entering Hong Kong was not a problem. And we wouldn't have been able to apply for Isaac's dependent visa until the adoption was finalized anyhow. Both Taka and I are permanent residents. So Isaac just entered as a visitor with me. There were no questions when we entered Hong Kong. No one asked to see any paperwork. Isaac's surname is double-barreled. I have my surname, Taka has his surname, but Isaac's, we combined both of ours hyphenated because that way we figured traveling, at least one of our names is, if we're not traveling together, at least there's a match with the passports.
And you have to carry the birth certificates with you every time.
So we did initially. We don't anymore. Yeah. I do when I go when we've had to go for medical treatment, or if I've had to go to the hospital with Isaac, and Taka has his own copy. I have my copy, just to avoid anything. And I'm more so worried for Taka's case because although Isaac weirdly looks like a mix of the two of us, Isaac is not Japanese. And so Taka arriving with essentially what looks like a Guaylo child I always am afraid that there's going to be some sort of an issue. So I'm like, bring that with you for that. So yeah, he entered as a visitor. I think we went to Macau so that he could continue to stay. And then the adoption was finalized, which meant, great, I can apply for the dependent visa. So I put in the paperwork at the beginning of May. And I hear nothing. May, June, July. By August, I'm emailing back and forth. And I'm like, what seems to be the holdup here? I don't understand. And I'd received a couple queries, like, tell us about the mother. I said, well, there is no mother. We are two dads. Yes, but tell us about her. Who's her? Taka. I'm like, that him, and he is my partner. But where is the mother? Well, I've explained to you, we've adopted him. She has no parental rights. I don't know what else you need. So then we hit September and I still am nowhere. And I write to immigration again and I go, what is the issue? What is the problem? I don't understand. You need to be more transparent. And they said, well, we are waiting to hear back from social welfare. I said, well, this has nothing to do with social welfare. And I have an email that says that social welfare has stated this is none of their business because it's a domestic adoption in the US. Oh, could you send us that email? So I'll go back. One of the things we had to make sure that we had prepared was that we had attempted to contact the central authority in China and in Hong Kong regarding the adoption, just to make sure that we had done due diligence. And so I'd emailed the central authority in Beijing several times and heard nothing back. So I had a record of emails sent. And then with social welfare, I'd spoken to them on the phone a couple times with some hypotheticals. And then I said, because everything has to be, you're a lawyer, you know this. Everything has to be a hypothetical because you don't want to get yourself tangled even more. And I spoke to one gentleman at one point and I said, I'm going to send you an email and can you please reply in writing? And so I sent a hypothetical email. I said, if this was the case, what would your response be? And he wrote back and said, if it is a US adoption that involves a US citizen that is not happening with any function for Hong Kong, it is not our business. Great. So once they received the copy of that email I'd received, the visa was approved the next day. And so now we're about to, Isaac is 7.5, so we're about to renew for the final time. Because he was already almost 1 by the time that he got his first visa.
Fascinating journey.
It's been a very long journey. And we have tried since then. When Isaac turned 1, we started the process again. And obviously during COVID, it was more difficult. Like Larry couldn't get here and then Larry moved back to the US. But it turns out because she'd done our home study and met us before, we just needed someone to come and do the physical site visit. So every time we moved flats, we needed a new flat to be checked. And so one time we had a US social worker who I knew, also a gay man in Hong Kong, and he came and did the site inspection. And then fed the report back to Larry, and that was included. Another time I found another US trained social worker through a variety of means who came out to our home to do the physical inspection as well. But we haven't, we've been through a lot with other cases, but we have not been successful.
Now, you mentioned that at the very beginning of this interview that you said kids is very important to you. Did Taka feel the same?
I think, so when I first met Taka, it was never in his realm of possibility. So he always figured as a gay man that he would not have children. And I think that me wanting that was probably made it possible. Like he could see it as a possibility.
But from his perspective, So a child is necessary in order to form a family, or
No, not at all. No. And, from my perspective, I don't think a child is necessary to form a family. There are many, many families take all shapes and sizes.
Agreed.
And I think as two gay men, we have our chosen family. We talk a lot about that. So when I think about the people I'm closest to, they are what anyone else might call friends, but they are our chosen people, right? And I don't think either one of us needed a child to make a family. We were already a family unit, just the two of us. But I think for me, I'm in a profession that I work with children all the time. And I knew that I just always wanted children, not to make a family, but I just felt like we would make a really good parents. And I think we've done a pretty good job. Taka comes from a traditional Japanese family, so there is some of that sits there as well. And Taka's mom was very skeptical about two men raising a baby, but we have joyfully proved her wrong. And she is very supportive, and she's been very supportive about us trying to have a sibling for Isaac as well. I think she realized that we could do it and we could do a good job. Isaac is crib bilingual, so he's fluent in English and Japanese. I think that impressed her. I don't think she thought that was going to happen. But it's great. But Isaac is surrounded by love. And I think that's at the crux of it, right? You said different color. What was
different colors, same love?
Yeah, different colors, same love, right? So like Isaac essentially has three kind of family units. And then I guess one big one, right? So like when we arrived back in Hong Kong, we had a homecoming for Isaac, a welcome. A welcome party for him, and we booked out a bar, because where else do you welcome a baby? It seemed like the right place. And I invited anyone who wanted to come, and we were like, please, no gifts. We don't need anything. We just want you to. Well, people spoiled him rotten, and us rotten. And there were so many people that came that we were just flabbergasted. But Isaac he has my family, so my parents and, everyone that goes along with that. He's got Taka's family, but he also has Karen's family. So after we came back to Hong Kong, Karen called us in February and told us, and she had kept her pregnancy hidden from her mother and her sister and her brother. So they did not know that she was pregnant. And there's a part of us that thinks that if they had known, they would have taken on Isaac, which is sometimes hard because they are now part of our family. And they're beautiful, beautiful people. So that February 2018, she called to tell us that she'd told them and they'd all like to meet us in that summer. And so that began twice annual visits. We were already going to Chicago, so we would see them in the summer and in December, and they very much became part of our family. Her sister was just here. She was in Guangzhou for work, and she stayed with us for the weekend. We're headed to Mexico City for a family vacation this summer with all of them, with abuelita, which is little grandmother in Spanish, and Karen and her sister and her brother and her brother's boyfriend.
So this being an open adoption means that Isaac maintains close contact with Karen. And presumably Isaac would meet with Karen quite regularly, quite frequently.
Well, I mean, we live in Hong Kong, and she's moved to Mexico. So it's a little bit more complicated now because we don't typically go to Mexico every time we go to the US. So up until she moved to Mexico, we would see her about twice a year. We do usually call her for her birthday. She calls us for Isaac's birthday. Sometimes we call for other family members' birthdays as well. It has always been, though, kind of we don't force anything with Isaac. So if Isaac said to us, I don't want to call, today, then we will message and say, look, he's really not up for a call today. Let's try tomorrow. And usually tomorrow he'll be, yeah, okay, we can call today. And I want him to always know that it is his choice. So like if he's 12 and he's like, no, I don't want to visit Karen this year, or I don't want to, then that is his choice. And that's something we're going to have to navigate when we get there.
When did he find out that he was adopted?
Well, there are two dads. And most other families he has seen. I mean, we have friends with two moms, but most families that he has seen are a mom and a dad.
So at the very early stage, Karen was already introduced as the...
We told him from the moment he started to ask, or when we thought he was cognizant of being able to understand his story, we wanted him to know his story. He has recently, in probably the last year or so, decided that he'd like to call Karen mom, which is a challenge for us. And there are questions that come up a lot around, you know, why does my family not have a mom? It's not that I don't want to have two dads, but he also doesn't understand how a baby comes to be. Like, we haven't gone into reproduction. He knows body parts, but he hasn't asked those questions. And when he does, we'll take a very factual view on it and explain what that is and how people procreate or reproduce.
As an educator, would you say that when communicating with Isaac, there's any differences between you and Taka, and as to how to approach this sensitive issue?
I don't think so. We're both very open with it. I know there have been times, one of the first times that Isaac asked a question about Karen, I wasn't home. And it was probably during bath time. And once again, Taka goes, you probably should have been there for that question. I think sometimes he doubts his answers, but Taka is a fantastic, fantastic papa. And the decisions he makes and the way he communicates with Isaac is beautiful. And I don't question or doubt anything that he does. And I think the same is likewise. I don't think my approach is different. I think sometimes I'm more informed, but he does his own reading as well. And so it's not like he's just coming totally blind with this. With schooling and stuff, though, like, we usually defer to me and my experiences. And you know, we've had questions around language development, and I'll be like, well, let's get him assessed and let's do this and let's see, you know, if there is anything there. But there are a lot of, and I'll use the term rainbow families in Hong Kong, at a wide variety of schools, from Christian schools to independent schools to international schools. They are everywhere. And believe it or not, most people in Hong Kong and in schools and within the international sector don't really care. They're actually usually excited to have like a same-sex couple parents in the classroom. They're usually the most popular parents in the room because it sits outside of the box. And like, I work in schools and I've worked in senior leadership in schools. And when Isaac was born, I was the vice principal of the school. When Isaac was born and everything was finalized, my principal said, well, we need a photo for the newsletter. And I was like, yeah, okay. It's not like I wore a big sign that says, hi, I'm Josh and I'm gay and I'm your vice principal at the school. But there wasn't any question to us celebrating the birth of a new family member for the school I was at. Like, that was a big thing. And I would have rainbow families come to school for interview and say, thank you for doing what you do. And I'd be like, this is my job. It's not like I'm waving a big flag around. But I think by normalizing, for lack of a better word, and just being present, it shows that it's okay. I've heard of very little discrimination of children within school settings with same-sex couples in Hong Kong. I probably hear more in news out of the US than I do here. Numbers would probably feed into that because there's obviously less in Hong Kong than there are in the US. But I remember Isaac was sick and I was covering in his P1 class last year, and they were starting a unit on families. And I was reading Todd Parr book. Todd Parr is a author, illustrator, does real colorful images. And one of his books is about different types of families. And I got to the family page where there were 2 moms and 2 dads and whatever. And one of the kids goes, oh. And then one of the kids in his class goes, and I won't use any children's names, but was like, remember Isaac? Isaac has 2 dads? And like, I'm sitting in the room reading this story and they're like, yeah, Mr. Blue and Taka, remember? They're both 2 men and they're Isaac's dads and that's okay. And they were like, yeah, that's totally okay. And da-da-da-da-da. And then we just move on. The only point where sometimes it comes up is if I've had a teacher who wants to do like a family tree project. Like, have we thought this through? Have we considered the wide variety of families? Because the model you've given have the mom and the dad, and like, where do we go from that? With that project, though, we were given full reign of creativity to do what we wanted to do. We created a garden with actually lots of different colored flowers, with photos and things to represent his family. Mother's Day is another one that's often recognized in schools. But once again, if you have the conversation, and I think that's at the crux of it, right? Like, as a gay family or as gay parents, we are the only ones who will advocate for ourselves. So within an education setting, you need to make it very clear that this is our family. If you don't, no one's going to know. And then you cannot blame anyone if there's misinformation or if there's prejudice, because you have to be the one to say, this is who we are. We are proud of who we are, and we deserve to be represented and respected just like anyone else within this community. And hands down, the majority of people will, and if they won't, and they're that uncomfortable, they will find somewhere else to go, and that's their right. But we have as much right to be there and be present and to belong as anyone else.
That's a very good summary. I remember just one final question. You told me that in the school, filling some sort of forms that you would try to fill.
So often in forms that you fill out for camps or for school admissions, and it's gotten better in Hong Kong, but we're still not quite there. Often it will say mother and father. The very simple switch here is to put parent 1 or parent 2 or guardian 1, guardian 2. And then if you want to put, you can have a line that says relationship, and then you can list what that relationship is. But it's a very easy switch in which to open it up and make it more welcoming.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, George.